In this video, watch a firm prop trader share savvy advice on how you can improve as a trader. Hi, I'm Mike Bellafiore, co-founder of S&B Capital, and we're a proprietary trading firm located in Midtown Manhattan. And I'm also the author of the trading classic, One Good Trade, and the playbook. In this video, one of the most diligent traders at our firm gives actionable guidance on what helped him improve the most as a trader, so you can as well. Also, we share a specific pick and pop trade to highlight these lessons. Let's get to work on sharing these game-changing trading lessons so you can grow your trading account.
I'll be going over, I call it a pick and pop. Some people could just call it a wedge breakout around VWAP, but this is from a month ago in Wish. And I'm going to be talking about in the review kind of the importance of specific goals and actionable goals as a main kind of component of this trade.
I love this already.
I thought you might.
No, it's great because we have a bunch of the new interns who have started, and so they'll get a really great opportunity to see somebody who does a great job at their process, such as yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So going with the trade strategy, so my trade criteria, we've done a couple playbooks, but it's always the same for what I'm looking for. So I focus solely on higher time frame breakouts, need elevated R vol. I want the price action to be clean. The sector has to be showing relative strength on the day. In this case, it's a little different, given that it's Wish and there's the Wall Street bets component around it. But I want the stock to be showing relative strength, usually within the sector. So you can say within the basket of these stocks. And then something that would put more risk on is if any one of these is exceptional strength. And then for this intraday pattern for myself, it's a wedge around VWAP. The idea behind it is you can avoid the mess in the morning and then you just wait for it to have a pullback that holds above VWAP cleanly, and then it will break out of the wedge. So the reason for this is that you basically let buyers and sellers fight it out in the mornings. It hasn't picked a direction yet, and then you wait for the signal, which is that pullback to VWAP that tells you that buyers won, and then you'll get the wedge breakout with elevated volume and increasing volume. So the first position for this is a feeler size for me on that pullback, and that's about 5% or less of my daily stop. And then I want to add when I have confirmation of the trade, which is the breakout with the volume. And then I want to get between 20 and 30% of my daily stop. And then reasons to sell, I like to use measured move targets. So I would be using the opening drive and just using that measured from the last pullback. And then a big thing, just kind of I keep telling myself this, is if the trade doesn't work, I want to let it stop me out and move on. In my trades, my worst trades, it's when I overanalyze and I don't give the trade enough time. So if it's something that's A+ like this Wish was, it could take longer than I think, but still work very well. And then the reasons to get flat would be my stop hits. And the RR doesn't make sense for if the trade does work and I don't want to hold it overnight.
How did you conclude that, or learn that you need to not overanalyze the trade and let it stop you out to trade at your best?
Yeah, so that's something that if you just go through all of your trades that didn't work, this is something that Dr. S talks about, but pay attention to what they do after you stop out. So there was a lot of scenarios for me where I was in the right spots, but either had too tight of a stop or was too eager for something to happen right away and it didn't. And then I noticed from looking at TraderView that it did end up working, but it just took a little bit more time. And then the other aspect of that is, like in past months, I would try to really limit my losses, be flexible in trades, but that's just, it has to be a back and forth thing. Because if you overdo that, then you're going to take yourself out of still winning trades. So that's something where like I just tell myself to stick to the process. And that is that if it is going to work, I want to let it work, wait for my target. And if it doesn't work, just let it stop me out and just size according to that.
Okay, great. Awesome.
So big picture, just kind of highlighting a couple things, not as important like just SPY in general, given that this is more of a speculative play. But we are seeing relative strength in tech coming into the day of the trade, but still nothing that I was very confident in. In general, seasonality for end of June is very weak on average, and we're going into end of quarter rebalancing. But for this trade, what's very important is that we're in a very speculative market, and after the AMC entire like craziness, everyone was watching what the next hot Wall Street bet stock would be. A lot of people had algorithms. Each day, people are really keening in on that. So that's kind of what was important. And in general, June was a great month for breakouts. There was a lot of breakouts each day, and they were pretty much very easy opportunities, which is very different than like what we're seeing this month or what we saw in May.
That AMC craziness is still going on.
I know. I don't think it's going to go away.
If you want to learn 3 more real-world setups that our traders use, including the simple setup that we teach all of our new traders, and the setup that turned one of our traders into a 7-figure big money earner, check out the free webinar that we're currently running. Just go ahead and click the link that should be appearing now at the top right-hand corner of your screen. That will open up the free registration page in a new window, so don't worry, you won't lose this video. You can also visit tradingworkshop.com to register for this free intensive workshop. You're going to learn more in a couple of hours from this trading workshop than from years of online education.
So big picture in SPY. So you can see like we were trending higher. We had 2 weekdays coming into this trade, but a strong bounce. It's easier to see on this. So you can see we're just kind of grinding higher at the end on low volume. And then we had 2 weekdays, but we're starting to find support at these lows coming into the day, and we had a slight gap up. So the fundamentals, this isn't really a catalyst-driven trade, but Wish was the top name going into the day. One that I like to use, and I know a lot of people at the firm also like to use, is Investors Underground. They set up a good algorithm for this. And in general, someone on my team also calls out the option flows throughout the day on some of the trades that a lot of us are trading. So with Wish, that was very helpful. And right off the open, there were large orders for the 14s calls. And then 10 a.m., you started getting a lot of size and orders for the 20s expiring July 2nd. And that continued throughout the day. So that's something where it's not a catalyst for the trade itself, but that could give you a little more conviction. And for Wish, the ATR is 1.33. Average volume was a little less than 50 million. And then on this trade this day, it did 335 million. RVOL, it was 30 on the open and 2.9 before my trade. And then what is really important, then when my trade came, the one I was looking for on the wedge breakout, there was increasing volume. It was 3.1. And this was like midday as well. So that's definitely a big factor. And then short float was 16% going into the day. And I'll kind of talk about this later, but the trade, like a lot of people were looking for the swing, but what made the swing hard for this is after this breakout, no one was really short. Like everyone was looking long, so there was no real potential for a squeeze. And then the institutional ownership was 96%, and the float was 336 million. So the daily on Wish, you can see we had a strong move off the lows from that like 7.5, and it started getting overextended, had a strong day one and gap to 15. So a lot of people there are looking for the backside trade. And in general, with those backside shorts, the idea is that it's going to end up going right back to where it came from. So in that case, it would be 7.5. So what the big thing to notice here is once you had that day one of the backside short, it held up. It found support at 10 and began to consolidate and could not go lower. So you can see the first day run up was a 50% move and then about a 40% gap. And then you had the backside set up with increased volume. And then kind of like I mentioned, you'd want it to go back, but we get this really tight consolidation between 10 and 12. So at this point, you're watching the consolidation and looking for any breakout above like 12, 12.25 with increased volume. And then this just shows you the previous day price action. So one thing to note is that right off the open, we get a lot of volume that comes in. And that's what got this on everyone's radar. Like it started to make people notice it. And then going into my trade, we had a large gap up back to the previous day high, and we're pressing the top of that consolidation range, that 12 to 12.20. And that's what kind of hints at me that it might be the day, might be the breakout day. And then I can show you some tape. I'm not going to show the whole tape, but I can just show kind of the spot I'm talking about. So we're watching it right now. This is off the open. It had an attempt to break out, stopped at 12.20, resistance again at 12.20 around 10.15, and it just began to consolidate around VWAP. So we're going to watch it come in now to VWAP, and we're going to get the first clean hold of VWAP. And at this point, I had a little feeler size when it started to hold 12, but it broke down now, which is fine. But I'm risking to 11.80. And right now, you can see I'm getting in, getting out, just kind of getting a feel for the stock. But once we get that clean hold, I put that feeler back on. And then we'll just watch how it trades around 12 here. I could probably actually skip ahead a little bit. Yeah, we'll just go right here. So second time for this tape below 12, you can see some size, but then we rebid again. And what I'm noticing and what I'm looking for is a change in character on the tape. So I want to see momentum hit the tape. I want to see just the speed of the time in sales increase. And we start to get that here. And with this, you can see that there's a lot of size on the offers, but it continually gets taken out and offers lift. So right there was a spot where I added, still not full size because we're still not above that like wedge around VWAP. Then I'll let it. I think it should be right around here. So I end up getting now into the rest of my size once it rebids and holds above this wedge. And at this point now, moving my stop up to VWAP on those last pullbacks. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see kind of the numbers with it. Volume's increasing dramatically, and you can see like the average last 30 bars. We just did 300,000 more in volume. And it should be in a couple seconds too. So a lot of size again at 12.15. In general, this 12.20 has been a wall, so if it's going to work, it has to get above there. And what's important about that is the way it gets there. I don't want it to grind there, peak above, end up like have a couple wicks above, but failure to hold above. I want it to just blast right through. And that would be a change in character. Let me see what it's going to be. Yeah, there we are. All right. So just see how it gets through 1220. You'll be able to see it on the tape as well. Because bids are going to jump up like 6 cents, 10 cents, which is a big difference than what we're seeing. All right, so now we're about to press it. You can see a lot of size starts to come in on the bids, a lot of size at 1220. And once 1220 lifts, the speed of the tape is going to increase a ton. So just like that, we're at 26 cents, 30 cents. And the volume is the biggest in the last, 30 minutes, something like that. And I'll kind of talk about it in my review, but when I see that kind of change in character, I should have been holding all my size. I was a little too eager to take some off. And the key here is the volume that came in through 1220.
Tim, do you think about different ways volume comes in, different levels of volume coming in, and then adjusting your size based on how much volume comes in?
I don't do that in a systematic way, although I think that could be very interesting. But in general, I use that as like a feel type of thing. Where in this setup, I didn't add, but there's been a lot of scenarios kind of similar to this, or there would be an important level that if it's going to work, it'll break through. So 1220 in this case. And if I see a ton of volume coming in and we blow past it, that's an add. So like kind of as a feel thing. That is something I'm looking into because I know, for example, Garrett does a good job with that, where he looks for certain consistent, like 500,000 bars, volume bars, as part of his like process, but something I don't do systematically yet. Here, I'll just kind of like fast forward. That was the main spot, but you can kind of just see it ends up just grinding higher throughout the day. And the other important thing too with this intraday pattern, if you didn't like get any size before the breakout, it would have been a lot harder because you've been chasing 1240s, like 1235, and just taking on a lot more risk. Now just going into my trade management. So for the morning, I tried it a first time. So we get some selling off the open, and a different intraday pattern I have is a crossover pattern. So when it breaks that downtrend with increased volume, you get long versus low day. So I tried it there in like the 4th minute, and it fails to hold 1220. So at that point, I lightened up a 4th. And once it came back and broke down through VWAP, I ended up getting out. So that was about, I think, 5 to 10% of my daily stop of a loss. And I was willing to risk about 30% of my daily stop in total on this trade for this day. So once that happens, that's just information to me that the pattern I was looking for isn't there. So I'm more now patient, sitting back on my hands, and you start to see the wedge form. So like we saw on the tape, I get some size on the first clean hold at VWAP, and then risking the previous higher low at 1180. And then this is kind of ideally what I want to do is I should have added more on the break at 1220, like I mentioned, and then stop at VWAP. And then first sale, ideally should have been above 1260 after the momentum move, and using the tape kind of to see where the momentum stalls. Sell 15% into my first target of 13 to get out of a 4th total. And then this is kind of the afternoon trade management as well as the swing portion of it. So once we get into my next target of like 14 and we get huge momentum into 1375, which you can see by that candle, and also increased volume. We start to get extended from the moving averages in VWAP. I want to take off 50%. And then we get a pull into VWAP, which is a separate intraday pattern for me. And I want to add a fourth back there. And those are my momentum shares for just playing the gap up, given the breakout and given where we're closing on the day. So ideally, this would be something you can put into like a long-term account and trade this as a separate trade, or you can just know the shares you're trading for each of them, which is what I did. So once we get that afternoon push, or after hours push into 1425, I want to take off the Momo lot because that was kind of like the gap I was looking for. Now day two, it ends up selling off some of the gap up and closing, or ends up like gapping down a little, I guess, opens a little weak, and you get a separate intraday pattern. So the idea here with a breakout could show multiple intraday patterns that I look for. And this one's like a dip and rip, some people call it. Show and go is what I mentioned, or what I call it. So you get it into a previous support level of 1325, which you can see in the first minute. So you can add then 25% risking the low of day, sell it into an ATR move from the low, and then I get flat fully on rejection through VWAP, which you can see right there. So now we get into kind of the fun stuff here with the review. So the reason I wanted to talk about this stuff, just because with this setup alone, this has been a big area of my review. So just in general, early on when I started live, I found myself with weekly and monthly goals that were very broad. So even though I was coming up with a pretty specific and clear plan on how could you move and improve that goal, it covers just too many bases of my trading in general. So you can improve on some goals, but you're never really fully achieving them. In that way, you're not really able to move on to the next thing that you should focus on. So like just an example of something from like early on that I said was I wanted to increase the ratio of my average winning days versus my average losing days to 2-to-1. So in general, that goal, there's a lot of things that go into that, a lot of components. And the simplest form is it could be split into either you focus on limiting your losses, so limiting the downside and making your average losing days less, or capitalizing more on your biggest winners, therefore making your winning days greater. So the more specific goal would be to just focus on one of those. So I want to make 25% or more, but put it at 25% more money on my best trades. And the way I'm going to do that is waiting for my measured move targets and not taking sales on the momentum breakouts through the previous highs. So that will help increase the upside of that ratio. And then a weekly goal that could help to make my progress go more smoothly with this monthly goal would be continuing to watch opportunities after initially failed setups in the morning, and then just using that initial loss I take as just information later on in the day, similar to what I did with Wish.
So what would be an example of what you used to do where your goals weren't specific enough? So transpose that with a specific month, or with a monthly goal that you found wasn't specific enough, or a specific weekly goal that you found wasn't specific enough.
So like this was one example, the one right here, but I could say another one early on was I want to stop over trading. Like that's something very broad, and like, yeah, it's definitely something to focus on, but there's so many areas that lead to over trading. So to make that more specific, you can then say this month, I want to focus on only taking higher time frame breakouts. And what are the 5 or 6 specific setups that I would take with higher time frame breakouts?
Okay, very good.
And then along the lines of the monthly goal I mentioned, I want to make 25% or more of my daily stop on my best and biggest opportunities of the month. So a way I go about making sure everything revolves around the goal during the month is making sure that's a main part of my review. So like with each of my trades, I'll go back and look at how I could have made 25% or more. And on the flip side, if I was working on limiting my losses and therefore helping the ratio, average winning day to average losing day, I would make sure that's a center of each of my daily reviews. So with Wish, the first attempt, so this is just kind of me going through it, but the first attempt in the morning was solid. I only lost 10% of my daily stop, which is fine. It's the risk I put on and accepted. And then for the pick and pop setup that I just went through, I ended up putting on 15% of my daily stop. So with that, it's okay. I could have put on the extra 5% that I allocated for the day, like I said, through the 12-20 breakout with the volume. And then the biggest area for me, which would have led to me making more on this, was with profit taking. So my first target was 13, second was 14. And with this, you can kind of see with all these executions, a little too trigger happy and eager once you got the confirmation. So I was out of 60% of my trade before my first target. And if I waited to just sell 25% into my first target, 50% into my second target, just with that alone, I would have made 60% more of my daily stop on this trade. And for me, it was a good trade. It was one of my bigger trades. So for being live, but just with that, this would have easily been my biggest trade ever. And it's just kind of those small improvements. And this was just a good way for me to really focus on it. And the big thing is just waiting for those targets and being a little more systematic with my sales. The last slide I have here is kind of that weekly goal I mentioned, where I had a weekly goal for the week that I took this Wish trade, where I wanted to continue to watch opportunities after failed setups and use that as information. So these are two examples in CRWD and ASAN, where I tried to take a trade off the pull-in to view up. So you get the strong opening drive and the pull-in. And I tried it in both of those in the morning, and those didn't work. So I ended up taking small losses on those. But then once that happened, I ended up flipping away from the names and taking them off my screen, even though they still have their A+ variables and they're still breaking out on a higher time frame. So my overall process is that if that's the case, I need to still be patient and waiting for a different intraday pattern to set up. And it might not, but I have to be still watching it just in case it does. And like, this was definitely a big one to review. Like this ASAN, this was almost the start of the breakout it had, and it ended up being one of the leaders of the market. So this entry could have been a really good risk to reward entry for a swing as well. And kind of the main factor, so maybe this will be helpful. So I have an intraday pattern, like I had multiple ones that are profitable, but I have one that is above and beyond the best. So it has the best stats, the best average win to loss ratio, best MFE to MAE, and everything, best win rate. And I've noticed that I tend to zone into that one specifically and only look for that. And when that doesn't work, then I'm like looking away and flipping away from the stocks. Even though I could use that and then it could still be a good setup later on. So like this was my goal going into the week. And it ended up paying off with this Wish trade because that's almost identical what happened. Where on Wish we got the failed pull-in to view up, and then we ended up getting this pattern set up. But yeah, that's it for the playbook. If you have any other feedback, Mike.
All right, great. Questions, anyone?
Do you just draw trend lines manually? Yeah, I just draw manually. Like the idea here is like, I don't think you need to draw them systematic. This is just a way to visualize it, because you can draw them like different ways, but this is a way to just visualize the trade for me. Where the big thing, and that kind of goes with what you said, Mike, like with just because we're looking at CRWD here, technically like this middle candle here is where it broke out of my trend line, but you want to wait and see where the volume actually comes in. So yeah, I just draw manually.
I really like what you're doing here. From my seat, my observation is that when working with really elite traders, the best traders in the space, there is a commonality amongst them, and that is they are very specific, they are very intense, they are super diligent about the work they're doing to get better. They're super specific about it. They're specific about it, they're intense about it, they're diligent about it, and that's different than other people who are fledgling or floundering or average. And so this is the type of distinction between the work that elite traders do or the work that people are doing who are going to become elite and people who are just average. Hey, go ahead and click our subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos that we're producing for you in the trading community. And please take the time to add your feedback in the comments section for what videos you'd like for us to produce next and what you found helpful from this video. From all of us at S&B, train and trade well.